last night with me, so we can make sure that that's available to all of you. And I know that she posted it on the YouTube as well, and you were putting it on the webpage. So thank you again. Well, getting started, as far as, and again, I appreciate the intros. I didn't put that on the agenda, but then I got to thinking that we would have new folks and especially, again, welcome Joe as the new official official voting member. Wanted to make sure that everybody had a chance to meet him. Um, First piece for us to have a conversation about is the minutes. I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at those. Again, thank you to Jenna and to Haley for doing those. And we need to decide about approving those minutes from our last meeting. And I don't know if we have a motion to do so, or if anybody has any discussion points that they want to bring forward.
I'd motion to accept the minutes from our last meeting with no changes.
Any further discussion or a second?
I second.
Was that you, Kelsey? I didn't see.
Yes, I
Okay.
second approving the minutes.
Any abstentions or further discussion? All right, so let's vote to approve the minutes. If people who are off camera or even on camera just choose to raise your hand or thumbs up, or if you approve the minutes, and otherwise indicate, please. All right, so it looks like the minutes are approved from our last meeting. I had worked on the agenda based off of our last meeting, and those were issues that had been summarized as we wrapped up the meeting, and did not get any real further comment on those. So I'm assuming that we will move forward with the agenda as proposed. Before we move forward, just want to see if anybody has any concerns, additions, deletions, other things to add, but I'm basing this off of the fact that I did not have any feedback. Is that a legacy hand, Kelsey? Or did you have some feedback on the agenda?
Did my little, no, I don't know why it's up there. I'm sorry. It went up on its own. I'll take it down. It is a legacy hand, I guess.
The phrases that we learn through being on these virtual meetings. Whoever
Well,
thought
now,
of the phrase legacy hand?
now now it sees you raise your hand and lists up the virtual hand without clicking the button. Messes me all up.
All right, so shall we move forward? I'm not seeing anything on my screen that shows any concern about the agenda or additions or deletions, so we'll move forward. One of the issues that came up during our last meeting was just there were a lot of questions raised about what happens with victim notification in terms of who is doing it on the post-conviction and what notifications are provided. How do we, I mean, so there's a lot of questions that I kind of bulleted out to some extent, but it's like, how do victims qualify for victim services from the unit versus from other entities? So, provided the directive in advance of this, just briefly yesterday, and I know Cassidy was really good on wanting to make sure that I did that. So thank you, Cassidy. But I thought it would just be helpful to kind of get just a broad overview before we hear more, especially from Joe, about the update on how things are going. But it felt like that lay of the land conversation really needed to happen. So. Um, unfortunately going to start thinking about this through your lens, Cassidy and Al's, to just try and give, that basic lay of the land, because there seemed to be a lot of confusion at the last meeting as to who does what, when, what is being provided, and just have a better understanding of that.
Well, thank you. In some ways, I feel lucky in seeing Danielle's familiar faces as well as Megan and her experience. But I think if everyone had an opportunity to review the policy that was put in place in 2022 and signed, really does outline the specifics of how a case is assigned. And when it says, and like in the only place I really see it being confusing when I reread it last night, and sorry, Jen, for the multiple emails, not my best work, but I was like, oh, wait, you did already send it. So
No, that's okay. Clearly, I need people that got my back, so I
yeah.
appreciate that.
So when I re-reviewed the policy, it really does outline that the VSU unit is staff to support the DOC staff. With the way the policy is written, I can see where it's, like I was saying before, is how it's vague when it says DOC staff. Now, DOC staff is CCSs and PPOs who are responsible. So we're not just
Can you
talking
spell
about
that
the.
out? Can you spell
Yep,
the acronym out
that's
too?
very fair. I apologize if I get into the DOC jargon. A correctional specialist, service specialist who does most of the case management and works with the individual, as well as the PPO, which is the probation and parole officer. Each have a supervisor, so that oversees and offers that additional support. VSU specifically unit as assigned, I think it was in page. It's very clearly outlined in the policy that they're getting assigned the highest, like the high risk designated sex offenders, the release sensitive notification offenders, and or incarcerated individuals. I apologize. And or those that may need additional support at the discretion of the DOC unit director, victim service director. I think that covers like who and what is done. I think in looking at the structure of this work group and the reasoning and goal for it was it complements the Vine. Like Vine is a tool of the overall responsibility of DOC staff who are doing case management. As I think Tim has highlighted in the past, they have really good ground one-on-one relationships with probation officers, with the SAVAs. So there's that work being done there for that contact information and how victims are notified. It's not, the notifications are just to complement what is also the responsibility of DOC staff.
I have a question. If
Sure.
I'm not seeing any other hands right now. As far as release sensitive notification, this may sound like a basic question, but again, I understand that a lot of that lies with the VSU team. But is there anything that spells out what that is, or is there just an assessment that's done by the VSU, or how does that piece get done?
For release sensitive notifications,
You said
there.
as far as what the VSU was doing more in terms of how the notifications were happening versus going to the CSSs and the PPOs. That's how I heard it. Maybe I heard.
Okay, so yeah, let me clarify is that yes, they may be assigned. However, I'm sure you're all familiar with it's a unit of 5. So if staff are on holiday or we're filling positions, it becomes the responsibility of the CSS, the correctional service specialist, or the probation and parole officer to make those notifications in addition to what may be sent out by Vine if requested by the victim of record or survivor.
Does anybody have any questions? And I know Megan and Danielle, you're coming off of this as well, so I don't know if there's any other pieces that are helpful to amplify how that process, works in terms of, oh, I see her actual hand up.
Actual hand. Uh, I do have a question, and I apologize if it doesn't fit in right here, but I think that it does. Um, so I hear a lot from PPOs, concern about not getting contact information and information about victims from SAVAs, which leads to the reason why they're not able to be in contact in a timely manner with victims, and that the two systems don't sync necessarily. And while there are reasons for that, I guess, and then I hear from Savas, a whole other side of this. And so I hear these complaints quite a lot. And why we all ended up here in this one little slice of it is that the victims are ultimately harmed. And so I understand very well at this point that both COs and POs are incredibly busy and SAVAs are unbelievably overloaded. So what I don't understand, and maybe you don't have the answer to this either, but if somebody gets a case assigned and they don't have the information they need, what is the justification for not pursuing the SAVA? I need this information. And if it's a chronic issue, then why isn't that raised with, superior? So I guess I'm just wondering, why is this an ongoing thing? Why, what's the breakdown? I'll leave it there.
I think thank you. I applaud your courage. Just go right for the gold. There's no messing around here. And I think the breakdown is one, you're looking at management, a really large system. You have, as like you said, the SAVAs who are tons of cases, the CSSs and PPOs who are managing up to 45 listed violent offenders in cases that have and incorporate harmed individuals. So I think, and what I know Meredith is trying to do in this, as we evolve and become better, because we are open to human error, not getting the information from law enforcement. We've talked about that. I think that was from the last meeting, and or not being able to record the information as a case may historically, somebody retires and they get reassigned. So that to me is operations of how we got to get trained and better in documentation, not necessarily anything more of just really honing and looking at how we're trading individuals, how we're storing information, which is the purpose of the Vine, this kind of task force. Is it something that we can utilize throughout the justice continuum so that information is shared between the two in a more streamlined effort versus multiple emails to people who have retired or moved on? That's what I think is the biggest breakdown, is that sometimes it just can get lost in the vast of need. Policy supports that ongoing communication, and then it becomes, becomes a supervision issue.
Thank you. I just really quick follow-up thought to that is two things that I just wonder, I imagine, with both sides of this piece incredibly overloaded, that doing, say, I don't know what you call it, but say it's the intake of the new case, primary focus is going to be the supervised individual and getting all those ducks in a row, and the victim is secondary, even though from my standpoint, you all are serving me. So I get it, but trained to work with them, but your job is really you're serving me to hopefully prevent, reoccurrence of the crime committed against me. But I understand the focus is on the supervised individual. And so I just hope in here we can enhance training around this is a necessary step, needs to be done initially from the beginning. And if you don't have the information, you need to get it. And then on the other end, I also want to say I'm also in the world of working with clients where their contact information is constantly changing, right? Like
Phone
constantly new
numbers. Oh my
phones,
gosh.
right?
Yeah.
New
Yeah.
emails, like can't get a hold of them,
Yeah.
or, all the things. So I understand there's a lot of breakdowns, but I do think, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, I
Thanks.
think we need to look at this in a broader sense too. It's not just the incarcerated individuals who are not that we're missing those messages around. We have people who are being straight sentenced from court for DV misdemeanor crimes, which we know and can all speak to the dangerousness of those cases. And we have to also address from pre-adjudication at the courthouse doors to a sentenced person on probated sentence. I think we have a tendency to focus on the release of incarcerated people, but there's that whole other party that I think we could look and focus in building a more robust communication streamline of somebody is charged by law, you know what I mean? They receive a citation to when they're actually sentenced in court, and then if they receive a probated sentence. I think we have a tendency just to jump to incarceration, but this is a whole other population of who are missed and opportunity to make connections. We have in each field office a court representative who sits on court hearings all day. Like we need to make those connections and build that stronger. Part of the policy that was introduced to you guys is the PSI process. When I was writing PSIs, I did all my own victim work, is that I really emphasized that crossover working with Holly Leach, that sometimes we'd meet together, and that's when that information was shared. So another really prime example of where having some way to document that. So now that I'm in a different position, that information can be shared along to another probation officer. So I think we like, in some ways, it's not just about incarceration to me. We have to look at that continuum of justice for notifications to what you're speaking of. So, Kelsey, good points.
I also want to acknowledge that Jane had her hand up a couple of times. Jane, I don't know if you
Jane.
still wanted to chime in because it's down now.
Yes, please. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to interrupt or anything, but we were talking about Vine notifications, and I just wanted to say that I had gone on Vine the other day because my abuser is still incarcerated. So I still get those notifications, and everything on that page, all the dates, all of the probation officer information is incorrect. It says that he gets out in 2026, March of 2026. He gets out actually this year. If it wasn't for one specific person in this group telling me that, I wouldn't know. So and it's still a very high risk situation. So it's just it was really hard to even get on Vine at this point, and then it had all inaccurate information on it. So I don't know how we could fix that.
Well, Jade, if I may, that's a really good point. Is there's really DOC has been open to human error around our booking process, which really is not sensitive to the needs of individual who's being notified. Is so one of the things that DOC has been focused on, which I think Joe can speak to because I know he sits on that work group. I'm going to throw you under the bus, Joe, is that we're really looking and building how we can do booking officer training, which is somebody who doesn't even have direct contact with a victim of record or a survivor of record, but it has a huge impact on those notifications. So we're looking at figuring out, and that's an operational thing of where we're going to need to train, ensure that we have officers who are doing those correct notifications, booking codes so that the correct information is going out to Vine. That's where that human error comes into, where we're responsible and can build, again, that robust training. Not that it's not to make you feel any better, Jane, and I apologize that communication is broken down for you.
Jane, I just have a really quick clarifying question. Is his new release date because of earned time or good time, whatever it is we call it?
Yes.
And so I think I've been told by Savas the system doesn't update for that.
Right. Which is a big issue.
So
'Cause,
it
I
may
mean, I
not,
almost died
it
the
may not
last
have been
time.
an error. It may not have been error when it was initially put in. It's that it doesn't allot for.
Doesn't update, yeah, for a good time.
Well, was a change when this language was passed as well to the earned time law. And I don't want to jump ahead, and I'm going to actually call on Megan because she's been very busy in the chat. But just in agreement with Meredith and other members of DOC, it was determined that there would be a change, that now there would be proactive notification to victims who chose it of earned time that has been, I guess, earned within at least every 90 days. And that Meredith really felt it was something that her team could take on and wanted to take on versus having it go through Vine. So that was an agreed to recommendation that was passed and went into effect on July 1st. So don't know how that message has been communicated to victims of record, but that is something that, again, Meredith and her team really wanted to do, that human touch, which, mine's a good tool, but the unit exists for a reason, and
Right.
making sure that those connections are being fostered and established and built.
And really the responsibility of all staff who have, direct contact with victim of records, not just the union. That's where we could get and bolster, again, the work the CSSs and the PPOs are also doing in conjunction with what the unit is responsible for.
And it also says that he's going out on probation or parole, and that he has a whole probation parole officer, and he's
Yeah.
not. He does not. So that's incorrect as well. It's just everything pretty much on that. That's why I try not to even use Vine anymore. And I have to rely on you guys, unfortunately, which I know it's a lot on your plates, but that's what's keeping me alive, honestly.
Well,
Because if I
Jane, you
went
should,
by Vine, I wouldn't know when he got out exactly.
Jane, you should never feel bad about calling the state attorney victim advocate. That is what we're here for. And for calling VSS. Never, ever feel bad about that. I always tell people the door stays open as long as you want to call us.
Thank you.
And I have been thinking since transitioning from the DOC about what I think some of the overarching concepts and points that we could be taking a look at in this group. And I think that identifying, the DOC has used Vine for conveying really important, detailed information. But I think in as much as that can help the DOC get certain messages across, it may complicate messages that go out earlier in the system. And when I think about what's most important about Vine is the tracking people coming in and out of incarceration, because it seems to me that that's where the most risk is to survivors. It's when they're planning for their safety. The most important thing for them to know at that moment is whether or not someone is incarcerated. So thinking about like the most important part of what this system can do for us, and thinking about how looking at those notifications and gauging their value through the whole transition from a person first becoming involved in the system and when they may be coming out of incarceration is something to consider here. And it seems to me that the one of the things that you're identifying, Jane, is that there's so much information. And I think when there's so many options for that, the intent being good to provide all the information that is important to you to, predict when the incarcerated person is coming out, maybe it's just opening up too many variables that can be incorrect. And maybe simplification is something that we should be thinking about.
I do want to, again, I don't want to put you on the spot, Megan, but you had a bunch going on in the chat, so I don't know if you want to weigh in as well. And I don't know if Tim had any thoughts on this piece to share.
Always a sidebar, right? Of course I have stuff to say, Jen. So I think just on the theme of this and having worked on two sides of this like continuum has been extremely valuable in terms of me easily identifying where the gaps are. I think the major gap that I believe Kelsey highlighted and Cassidy spoke to some is that like transitional piece. And one of the things that I've spent a lot of time over the last 5 years working on is like figuring out a way to operationalize getting victim information into from the SAS system to the DOC system. Because when I transitioned to DOC, it felt like there was really no systemic way to do that. And yes, it's very important for incarcerated people, but I didn't even know until I went to corrections that VINE was also a tool that DOC was relying on to notify victims where people are supervised within the community of their statutory rights, right? So like their discharge from supervision, that sort of stuff. Even before I transitioned, I always sent the POs like the contact information for victims. And I was really surprised to learn when I went there that nothing happened with that information and that most of the POs did not even know how to log into VINE. And we trained POs that it wasn't their responsibility to log that information into VINE, that was VSS's, which was very cumbersome. And I know Danny and I talked a lot about like just the logistical capacity for that. Because it's data entry. It's like an administrative function where I would send out like some sort of outreach to the contact information that the state's attorney's office had saying, hey, this is the system we use. It's imperfect. These are the issues with it, but like you need to have it in there. If you don't want automated notifications, we'll store your information in a different location. And that is a very effective way to do it, but it does require such like a human resourcing issue. And I don't know what the capacity is on either end. I've heard from SAVAs and I've heard from, DOC partners that like there just isn't the ability or the staffing or the resources to do that. But it is the method that, the state's attorney's offices use from law enforcement because it's the same. We kind of have the same thing. The law enforcement agencies use a system that we don't use. And so when we get the paperwork from them, we get the victim information and then we enter into our case management system and we do at least an initial outreach. And I think that would close a ton of gaps because the biggest issue outside of the notifications being alarming, having too much confusing information, it's that survivors don't have that like warm handoff. So oftentimes, and I think it's contributed to the distrust on the state's attorney advocate side, is that the last point of contact a victim had was their state's attorney advocate, and that's who they call when they're getting the wrong notification. So, Meredith, Ashley, when I was in the VSS role, we weren't hearing a lot of that, but on this end of things, we hear it all the time because that's the last person they've been in touch with. They don't know. And I've sort of been working hard back in this role to make sure that victims know who the point of contact is at DOC, whether it's a PO, a caseworker, a VSS. But it's a heavy lift. I'm not going to act like it's not. I just don't know. And I think there's maybe some tech solutions to that, but I don't think it will be foolproof. And it's just, so I hate to identify a huge problem without a major solution because it's a resourcing issue, but that is one of the major issues is even making sure survivors understand other than like the SAVAs hand out the information. Like we give them information saying, here's VINE, but it's not exactly a trauma-informed practice. And then they never hear from anyone again. So a lot of people just aren't signing up because there's so much information for them to be taking in at the adjudication of a case. That's my soapbox.
Yes, and that's absolutely rings true for my experience. I think in Chittenden County, we were great at identifying really risky cases and communicating between the SAVAs and myself and getting those folks registered and understanding what their wishes for notification were. But it was just the tip of the iceberg. We were just triaging. And there was lots of other cases that we never even touched. they never touched and I never touched. And, you know, I think over time, you become pretty good at triaging and identifying what cases are riskiest, but there's always going to be sleepers in cases that, you know, on paper aren't, you know, don't rise to the level of requiring immediate attention. But that's a risk that we're taking when we're making those decisions and choosing to allocate our resources towards a certain number of cases and not having a very routinized way of getting information into Vine. And I truly think it is just a resource issue, that we could have like administrative support that could really push the process along.
Well, and I think that's one of the hopes of this group is that we can identify where those needs are and then advocate for, each other and creating a system that is, meeting victims' needs, is more, sorry about my cat, is victim centered, but also recognizing that there's a lot of work that's required and a lot of it, again, identifying the resources that are needed. Training has been mentioned, additional hands and eyes on cases. So again, I see that as something that collectively I see as the goal. Like, what do we think is needed and how can we support each other? Tammy, you put something in the chat, a question I saw.
I did. I just was asking, so when an offender comes into custody with the Department of Corrections, do they receive the law enforcement packet, or like the way that we find out victim contact information is the Leo discovery form? That's where the victim contact is listed. That's how, at least in Bennington, that's how we reach out. And I'm just wondering if that form is attached anywhere so that corrections would have the victim contact information. I get a lot of phone calls from probation officers and people saying, do you have the contact information? And my thought for the last 25 years has always been, don't you get the same thing as I have? So maybe they don't. I just am curious about that.
We don't.
Okay.
We get the court documentation, and unless the Savas provide it, and or it's part of the discovery of PSI, for the listed violent offenses, does that information actually get crossed over? It's been my experience as a probation officer for a long time working with Holly. I would ask Danielle, she's just coming from the field. Did you receive that regularly from Chittenden Savas?
I think what I heard the question to be is whether at booking they receive that information. Am I understanding it correctly?
I think she's asking about anyone coming into DOC custody. So post adjudication, if the LEO form with victim contact has been made available to you or other probation officers from
None
Savas.
of that stuff is, I don't even know what any of that is or means. So I think that's a no.
I think in my experience, and I noted it in the chat, when we rolled out this directive, I heard from a lot of like former Savas that I was connected to. They're like, DOC is like reaching out all the time now and asking me for contact information. Like, what is this? Like, this was 10 years ago. What's happening? And I was like, well, we're now like DOC is being so much more proactive about understanding. I think there was maybe a misunderstanding that if they weren't in Vine, that the legal obligation to notify them disappeared, which is actually not correct. And when we rolled out this directive, I think it was a huge shift in practice for DOC to like actually reach to the person to say like, hey, who's the victim survivor? Like, we know in a domestic violence case or an ag assault, or like there of course is a victim of record, but oftentimes I would hear no victim of record. And what people were meaning is that there wasn't anyone in Vine. And I think that has started to like seep down in terms of like a better understanding of what victim of record means. And I know that it was a shift, and maybe, I reflected back that there could have been better communication probably between departments about like, hey, we're shifting this practice. You're going to be hearing from us more often. And I've sort of encouraged, I know we're all overworked, but I have encouraged more proactive sharing of that information. And I think that at least in like this region of the state, it's working pretty well. But to Danny's point, it is still mostly the cases where we're highlighting that there is like an ongoing need for somebody because it might be a misdemeanor, as Cassie pointed out, it might be a misdemeanor domestic assault conviction, but maybe it was like there was a lot of egregious stuff and this person is very at risk. And so we're trying to identify those for POs and VSSs serving the region. I think collaboratively moving forward, if that can be a more common practice through an MOU or something, especially if we can all advocate for more like where the positions are needed or where we're drowning, that would really serve survivors.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead just for a second because you referenced again, I hear a lot of conversation about, yeah, that warm handoff and collaborating, and just heard the magic word, the MOU, Megan. So I know that I haven't spoken to Tim recently, but I know Tim, I believe, is working with Al and others at DOC to think about the MOU and think about these connections. It's really troubling that law enforcement has their database, SAVAs have, or I'm going to say State Securities Advocates have theirs, and DOC, and I know that there were conversations around that. So I feel like I don't want to, we'll get to you, Joe, don't worry. Cassidy already threw you under the bus, but I feel like any update that you may have or anybody else from DOC as to what that conversation has been looking like, because it feels really clear that that would be a really important accomplishment for victims and survivors.
I can speak to that a little bit. We have met our IT team and Tim's team and trying to figure out a solution on how we can marry those systems together and share data. I know that Joyce from Vine had been involved in those conversations as well. She had sent an email back to us, I think it was last week, with a potential solution and also an option for a connection via 911 to get victims notified. So that's on our next conversation with Tim and how we may be able to implement that new function or feature of Vine. So more to come on that, but it's still really in the early stages on how we may be able to create that data sharing with Vine and the new system that's being employed by the DSA's office.
And that data system still is a little bit away, though, correct? I see Megan nodding and I see Al not.
Yeah.
So I don't know if through an MOU, and again, I don't have the latest from Tim. I'm looking at you, Megan, as his proxy to see if you do, or Al, if there's been any progress on, there's been a bunch of points raised that would be significant to be included in that MOU, it seems like, and I don't know how that looks, or I assume you'll just bring this back to Tim as something to start with, but any updates from your department, Megan?
I mean, other than Al's update is accurate. We've had an initial meeting. I do think that, obviously this is like a lofty goal of like making it easier on the human end of things. And it would be great if our databases could just push that information. My understanding is that it would require the state's attorney advocates to like flag that a victim does want to be in Vine. Or would want notification. I don't know what would happen with that data on DOC's end if it's not flagged. Like, I don't know where that would, if it would just go in the notes section like the practice was before. I think the idea is to shift some of the human burden, try to with tech. But I do think that's it sounds like that's probably a ways out, but it's certainly something I think everybody is eager to see happen to try to eliminate some of the burden, but make sure that survivor information is being shared in some sort of automated fashion.
And I think as many of us know who were part of the legislative process, House corrections and institutions really honed in on, making these data systems talk. And again, I'm just sensitive to the fact that a strong recommendation, once we figure out what else is needed to make that happen, would be very well received. And again, I want to think about how this task force can collectively advocate for pieces that we all think are very much needed. So the interest is certainly there in that committee, and they have a good amount of oversight over DOC's budget. I'm pretty well think. So it's helpful to have them on board if more is needed in terms of resources. Um, and I think, the judiciary committees would be motivated. So I want to just focus on, these continued updates from you all on the MOU and the data system so that we can drill those down when we move forward collectively on this.
I just wanted to quickly say, as I'm learning so much listening to you all, I always appreciate that while I've heard you all say, and I firmly believe we need to continue to enhance, try to move away as much as possible from human error and continue training. There isn't capacity to put more load on anyone working in the system as it's designed. And so asking people to have more steps in their process isn't realistic. And so the having the data, the different systems be able to communicate would be such an important, effective approach. And of course, we need to educate the humans, but I really appreciate you all prioritizing that, listening to you. Thank you.
And yes, educating the humans is an important part in finding resources to educate all of us humans.
In that education piece, just one thing that I'm kind of thinking about that perhaps belongs in a parking lot is, especially as someone who's newer to these systems than many of you, it's so complicated to figure out like how the information flows. And, I think a lot of legislators are in that same boat too, of being newer to how these systems interact, and that thinking through some way for all of us and for legislators and, survivors, communicating how that information flows and how these systems interact and where those breakdowns are would be really helpful in solution making.
I agree. And I was spending a little too much time trying to figure out how to do one of those little charts with the arrows and all of that, and I gave up. So if anybody's a real smart person in terms of that kind of design, I think that visual would be so helpful and would really also clarify, like you were saying, Charlie, like how does it flow? And I think that's a real clear place that we could start to, kind of lend ourselves to looking at the gaps.
If I remember correctly, sorry.
No, something that just continues to kind of run through my mind in all of this is also, choice on behalf of the victim and survivor. And sometimes these systems are working together over years and years and years, and just making sure, I think I'm very much aware of when I get a lot of really kind of intimate information about someone that I'm not necessarily sharing it unless I have to. And sometimes that includes contact information and address and a new name and all of these things. And just, I think like Megan was saying earlier, like, how are we doing this in a trauma-informed way and making sure that people know how their information is being shared, which I think is tricky in the context of this conversation, but I think about it a lot just in the past hour. Are people knowing like how much of their information is just going from one system to another and a lot of different people having access to it?
Thank you, Amy. I actually really appreciate that, like the respect around privacy and individuals' autonomy to choose to be notified and how they're notified, just based on what people assume their role and responsibilities as being, in this overall system. What I was going to speak to is, I believe earlier maybe a year and a half ago, and I'll may be able to weigh in, is the VSU, Meredith had done a continuum of mapping, and I'd like to check in with her to see if that was done about where the justice continuum of those contacts were made and the different things. So we might actually have it, Jennifer.
Oh, that'd be great. I've only seen the map of where the VSS coverage is, but that's maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
So let me ask, I don't want to overcommit because she'll be like, you signed me up for something when I chose to take time off. I'd rather not be that individual. But I'll follow up and ask about that and have her push it out if we do have something. So then
Also,
we can
Jenna
add to
and
it.
I, when I was at DOC, did a training for the Victims Assistance Academy, which I think is, so we do have, like, these are the slides from it. We do have it. And I think it still lives on the VSU share drive, Cassidy. I think so, anyway. But it goes through the continuum. It's more complicated, but we could probably simplify it.
That would be great. And if anybody finds anything that they've, seen, and wants to share that in advance of the next meeting so we can get right into it and tackle it, that would be great. And Jenna, you had your hand up, but it's not up anymore. So I just want to make sure that we don't forget you if you had something.
I was just going to say that I do have the capacity to help make a vision board or a flow chart. So if somebody could provide me with all the information, I'm willing to take a stab at that and provide it by the next meeting.
Woohoo! Thank you. I was hoping that's why your hand was up. Still a lot to go, but I also want to recognize that that Joseph's here, and I know that Meredith had mentioned that you've been doing a lot of work with the Vines folks and with DOC to kind of drill down on some of the issues that were identified, about a year and a half ago as well, and in the September meeting that DOC convened in 2024. So. I don't know if I'm feeling like it's a good time to get that update. And I also just want to say, I didn't mean to put DOC on like blast at first. It's just, we have so many things that we're thinking about, but trying to understand more. And, again, that connection between the state attorney's advocates, it's like, this is your system and we all are thinking about different ways to use it, whether it be with law enforcement or, can the state attorney's advocates use it more? So it's just trying to figure out how do we all collectively support the work that's happening now and use that to inform our process moving forward in terms of recommending expansion. So I didn't want to come across in that manner, and I hope I did not.
Well, I had one question when I was reviewing the task force kind of group and looking at how we're analyzing the system in general and notifications and training. Will we be doing this for each piece, like the Sava's doing, you know what I mean? Like where each person, like we're going to do law enforcement, as we heard, was a significant of how that information, then we'll be doing, will we be looking at the Sava's way and the information from court, and each component, because that's what I thought and assumed you were doing when you're like, oh, DOCs, because we're automatically using Vine, but will we be looking at each of those different systems as well in the notifications?
Having been a part of those conversations, that was the thought, is like, how can we make this, we'll focus on what we have so we know how we can carry this forward in different avenues. And, I know that there have been conversations about using it for protection orders, for seizure of firearms, so different places that this could go in that direction. So unfortunately for some of you, the conversation currently kind of relies on what we have been doing and what we have what lessons are learned. But I absolutely see this as something that we would be, and I think everybody else does too, as far as how we can just look at it in a broader lens.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
But also without leaking the victim's information.
Yeah, that was a really important piece that you added, Amy. I just want to reflect on that as well, because I know sometimes, when we use anything, on the internet, we're like, oh, now I'm going to see 5,000 ads everywhere for this, that, and the other, or using a doctor or a mental health provider and wondering, like, where does that information go? Because it's all collected now, and who knows where it lives. So I haven't really thought about that. I've always thought about victim choice and opting in, but I hadn't really thought about how scary that is to turn over your information and not know who accesses it. So I think I just want to say thank you for raising that, and it raises important concerns too.
Jen, I know we have a packed agenda today. I'm wondering if there will be an opportunity in the next few minutes for like a 1, 2 minute bio break.
Yes, I would love that. If anybody who knows me knows that, like, yeah, this is past my point. So yes, if we could do like bio break, refresh coffee, why don't we just do that now? And then I'll give Joe a second if he's still with us. I can't see on my screen.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm here.
okay, great. So yeah, let's go do what we need to do and see each other in like 5 minutes. Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate the permission because I was like, I don't know if I can make it, but I'll try.
Thank you, Jen.
And thanks again, Charlie. That also gave me a chance to check in with my son who decided he was going to go solo traveling to China and Japan by himself for 3 weeks. So I'm like, okay, you're still alive. So that was good. He was going to bed, but I'm very happy to have had a chance to check my text. So,
Oh, good. I'm so glad. I hope he's having a blast.
well, so far. We'll just give it 1 more minute and then we'll get started at 10:10. Just to give people a couple more people I see that are off camera, and I don't want to assume that they want to be on camera, but I also don't want to get. All right, well, why don't we get started? I think it would be, yeah, great, Joe, if do you go by Joe or Joseph?
Joe is fine. Either one's
Okay,
fine.
it'd be great, Joe, if you could just let us know all the really important work that you've been doing on some of the more specific issues that were identified over the course of the last year and a half or 2 years.
Sure. So we've had a lot of focus on the Vine notifications specifically that are going out and trying to improve the accuracy and effectiveness of them. So just a little bit of framing that helps me kind of understand the technical side of this. There's really like two components that go into it. There's the DOC data that's delivered to Vine, and then Vine does a kind of transform. They have like automated rules that are set up that create and generate their notifications. As Cassidy mentioned earlier, we're working on improving the DOC data by revamping our booking training for booking officers. It's a lot of that information that gets entered at booking and transfers and things like that is the data that gets sent to Vine to communicate to victims, the movement or the current locations of individuals. So on that side, we're doing a lot of work to revamp that to improve the effectiveness of and accuracy of that data that's going to feed into the Vine system. But we've also been working with Vine we've discovered that I think over the years, like long before I came on board, I think the system kind of evolved and became very complex. And we've recently decided we just need to really simplify those automated rules that transform the DOC data into notifications, simplify it and streamline it to make it more accuracy, give better useful information to victims. So we've identified, I think there's like 3,700 different scenarios that we could provide to Vine, and we're going to simplify those into categories so that we end up with, I'm just making up a number now because we don't know yet, but maybe like 50 different notifications or something like that. So it'll be much easier for us to track and maintain the quality of those notifications that go out.
Is that something that you then could continue to update the group on so that, we could have that kind of feedback? And I'm especially thinking about Kelsey and Jane from a survivor perspective. I think, it certainly makes sense to really focus on those important areas. And is that something that the group would be involved in?
I can certainly provide updates on that. And in fact, there will probably be an update later today because we're scheduled to meet with them today
Oh, okay.
to take the next steps in that project.
And just for others who might be newer members of the public, when you mentioned about the booking data, as I understand that, that's the data that triggers the notification process and what notifications. It's not, or it's both victim information and the coding, because I think that was something that you all were working on too, because I know
Yeah.
that people were concerned about, and I know Joyce has spoken a lot about how it's really, the system is triggered by the code that goes in. So is that part of that?
Yeah, that's part of it. So when people are booked in, it'll it'll store data about where they currently are when they were booked in, where they moved to or from. So that's the information that gets sent, and then it's mixed with, I believe the victim information is entered directly into Vine. So then they take the two and kind of transform it and create the notification based on some rules that we set up that we decide, we want to notify victims when they move from here to here, or when they get released, or things like that. So yeah, so on the booking side, we're working on improving the booking training to improve that data, but then we're also working with Vine to kind of decide on better rules so that more effective and useful notifications go out and more accurate, because we're finding that in the past they're not always accurate.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just was thinking that other folks on this meeting might not know those different pieces that have been part of presentations.
Yeah, sure. And if
There.
anybody has any other questions, I can attempt to answer them.
Tammy, you had a question in the chat?
Sorry, yes. I was just wondering, so some offenders, when they're booked onto the system, are booked on with a dual status. And I think that that can create some significant confusion to people if the system is attempting to let them know that they're booked on, but also that they're on probation, right? So you're in jail, but this is your probation officer. So I think that that gets confusing for people. And I don't even know if Vine sends out that type of a notification. I have no idea.
I don't think it does. I think the notifications that get sent out are typically just the person's movement
Okay.
and whether they are, actually released or just transferred to another location, things like that. I'm not sure if a dual status is something that would be communicated by the victim service specialists or not. Like earlier, we talked about release times, estimated release dates, and stuff like that. That would be communicated. Maybe that also could be communicated.
I think, Tammy, if I may give you some information, is that a probation officer is going to be assigned to incarcerated individuals who are even on a max out. So I think that information, which can be found often on Jail Tractor for the offender locator, should have assigned probation officers and/or CSSs. So, and typically it's the office for the original sentencing court is. So that information, so that's kind of something newer movement we're taking as Department of Corrections is focusing on reentry and integration work, is having assigned probation officers to even max out cases, which also will help with the contact and safety planning for around victims and survivors who may be just maxing out.
Right. And so when a person is sentenced with a dual status from court, I always explain that to them. I just wasn't sure if if we were talking about trying to include that sort of notification into Vine. I know currently it doesn't do that. Like I read through the agenda.
Yeah.
So I'm aware, but I just didn't know.
Yeah, received. I think that can be just one thing that maybe we keep in our pocket as we review that system.
And for people who might not know, or members of the public, Tammy or Cassidy, do you want to explain dual status just so that's clear?
Sure. So a dual status, as I understand it, if a person is sentenced and they and they have a 1 year sentence and on probation, but 6 months of that, say, is a split sentence to serve, they have a probationary sentence, so they're considered a probationer, but they're also incarcerated. So they have a probation officer in, like, Bennington is where I'm from, so they would have a probation officer in Bennington, but they would also have a caseworker at the jail. That's a dual status, and it can become confusing if you're on probation for the full year, but then half of that time, you're serving your sentence as well. It just gets it can just be confusing. Who do you call, essentially? So they always call us.
No, and that's a lot of us live in this world, but I want to make sure that we're being transparent for folks that, might be tuning in, or legislators who might tune in later, and just explaining these different terms. So thank you.
And of course it can get more complicated
Yes.
too. I mean, I'd love for it just to say, like, oh, it's a split sentence of a portion of the sentence is incarcerated. But when we're looking at multiple counties and different courts, we may have an individual who has like a furlough sentence, but has a small docket that's been sentenced strictly to probation. That's also the same language that DOC uses around dual status. Someone could be a probationer, but also be involved in treatment court. And we're seeing treatment court now accept more cases with some violence, which also could be attached with someone who's been harmed in the community. So there's that. Just to throw out more complications around sentencing structures.
Well,
but I think bottom line is
maybe we'll just go back to Joe and his very straightforward presentation.
Bottom line is, so it seems that there will be a DOC staff member, and staff being CSS, or a CSS, or a PPO, or a VSU, a specialist. Someone should be assigned if there's been, for the higher risk cases.
Was there anything more, Joe, or are you just waiting to see if there's more questions?
Just waiting for more questions. That's pretty much where we're at now in the project.
Well, I guess I have one. You were mentioning the booking info, and you've obviously been a part of this meeting now. And I think it would just be really important when you're having these conversations with Vine to think about what you all need and how we can best facilitate in this process. And so you've heard about the MOU and, trying to do the warm handoff, but how we can make sure that on the victim information end and what is needed, these different points of contact, whether it be law enforcement, state's attorney's office, or whichever, because that information is needed by all of you, and trying to think about that. So if you want to be giving some consideration to again what role this group can play in supporting that would be really great. I do have a couple more questions. I don't know if anybody else does, but
I have a quick question, Jen.
yes.
So I just have a question that comes back to something that was talked about earlier. And I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting this, Jane, but when you were talking about kind of simplifying the data and breaking it down into categories, Joe, something I think Jane was saying earlier was that there's so much information there and that it's kind of hard to navigate. And I don't know if when you're breaking down those 3,700 scenarios, like, I know it's hard to think about any of our systems on a continuum because they just don't work that way. But is it like when you're simplifying the data, will it become kind of like clear about like where scenarios, like if a scenario is like currently applying to someone and then here are things that might happen in the future? I don't know if this question even makes sense. It's how I'm thinking about it, but I just don't want to lose what Jane was saying earlier about all of the information that's on there and how it's organized. And I don't know if that's part of what you're doing.
Well, I think this is, if I may, Joe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is just one piece to what our booking codes are about. Like, I just want to emphasize that this is also a place where DOC captures a lot of their own data so that we report out. So the victim, this is, I think, and we are and would emphasize that DOC does take into consideration the impacts on survivors and victims, but this is just one piece to that overall booking attention, the training that we're giving to booking and attention, because it's data that we're also collecting for pretrial. It's data that we're collecting for, home detention cases. Like, this is just one piece to it. I think it's great that the work group is offering an encouraging intentional focus. I think that focus is very much there in these trainings and opportunity provided to emphasize the importance of correct booking to staff, like, again, to correct that human error because of the impact it may have on survivors. But like the way we have, like, this is like really an operational kind of push, if that makes sense to people. And Amy, to answer to your question, I think it's a little more complicated to that simplification of where we'll be able to meet our statutory obligation on notifications, but also we have to enhance our own data collecting in those projected and or booking options for POs, if that makes sense. Joe, does that kind of align with the overall work group around our booking process?
Yeah, I think so. And I really just kind of mentioned the booking part because it's directly related to the specific notifications that go out and bind, but obviously there's much more that we're working on.
Kelsey, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have some thoughts that are sort of follow up and connected to a few things people have said. But one is I'm following along and learning so much. I would really appreciate what Jen asked Joe in terms of sending some kind of updates, but I also I'm quite certain will have questions if there can be some kind of presentation when you get further along in this project of kind of, this is what we came up with, like, this is what it's going to look like. Be easier for me to conceptualize, the questions, I think. And so I really look forward to that. And I think that would be an important thing for this group, this task force, to have access to some kind of presentation. Also, in terms of what Cassidy was just saying in the training of booking and the potential for human error can lead to harm on victims, I really, really want to lift up that what I hear over and over from DOC staff that have attended the trauma-informed victim communication training, also law enforcement, when I have the opportunity to talk to officers, is that when we can weave in some kind of lived experience of this is what it actually can look like, a lot of people that lands in a way that's more impactful that they may remember when they are burnt out and tired and right, like, understandably we all get there. And so I just always want to keep lifting that up. We put so much training on everybody and I get that. But when we're talking about real life risk and harm, training people, giving them the real context, not just, a super DOC employee saying, hey, like, really bad things can happen, but giving real life stories, even if it's abbreviated, I think really helps.
From
And
Vermont.
sorry, Jen. I do know to Kelsey that's continues to be our agenda, DOC's agenda. Like, we're bringing you back for another series of trainings, and so I do appreciate your time in that, and have been able to receive feedback from other staff, the PPOs and CS. I think we only had a few CSSs, so that will continue to be our focus, and appreciate your time in that, because it definitely, that training has impacted staff. So thank you.
Before I ask any questions, am I missing any hands about anybody else having questions? I was just wondering, Joe, I don't know if the committee's gotten to this point yet, but I understand that there were concerns raised about language accessibility, readability, and different pieces with the forms that have been provided. Ashley had sent us some forms earlier, obviously in June, I think of July of 7th. And I don't think we'll have a chance to get to those, but I know that was something that was raised. And I understand from Joyce at one point that that was a target. And do you know if there's been any further look? I've reached out to Disability Rights. Tracy Schreiber is here, not going to put her on blast, but just want to think about how the forms also read. So I don't know if that's come up yet. And as I last heard from Joyce, the only other language was Spanish, which is not the dominant non-English speaking language. So do you have any information on that?
I don't have an update on that, but I'll take it back to Meredith and Ashley and see if there's been any progress.
Okay, that would be helpful because I think that was some real clear feedback that we got from victims and survivors and others in the community. And yes, I see Tracy is happy to collaborate, and I've been raising the flag that we need to involve them on looking at the forms that we provide.
I think another helpful bit of information to receive from Joe moving forward would be the rules that govern whether notifications go out overnight or as they're happening. Ashley mentioned in a couple meetings ago that there were certain notifications or there were rules that dictated when certain notifications went out. And I would like to know more about that and how those rules are applied to certain notifications.
Okay, yeah, I could definitely provide something like that. That's sort of in the works. Meredith and Ashley really decide when, the scenarios. But once we get a list, I could bring that to the group.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that, Danielle, because that was one of the questions I had taken away from the presentation, and it's unfortunate it wasn't able to be successfully recorded, but there was a definition. It was non-emergency notifications, and I put the question in the chat, but it wasn't able to be addressed. Like, who decides what is a non-emergency notification and what is that criteria? So I think that would be helpful to understand.
Since we have Joe and we're kind of in this vein, can I just also flag a point that Jane had made, I think, in the last meeting? And it's come up a few times, like the release notification that goes out as we're looking at the tech of it. I know we've talked about like ensuring that there's like the warning, like not higher. I got a release notification this week that was like, this person's released. And it was like the day, 8:15, this person has been released from custody. And so just like talking about earlier, like if there's a way to set it up so that a certain number of days before, and it may already exist, so forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but like if they could get like a, certain periodic warnings, I think she highlighted as helpful. And I think earn time might complicate that, but I think that would be a useful tool from a survivor perspective from what I've heard.
And I had a question back to what Jen was saying about the notifications about non-emergency. Now, is there a criteria that the SAVAs use as well in the emergency, non-emergency? Is there like a universal criteria that's used also through like the Center of Victims about what emergency or criteria or something or feedback we've received from survivors or victims? Just a question.
Tammy wants to weigh in, but the SAVAs utilize, like, we do all in-person notifications. So if something urgent or like victims get notified of every single thing that's happening.
Is there timelines?
There's a little bit of a distinction, right, Megan, with listed crimes, just a tiny bit.
There is. We usually pretty universally apply it to like sending out notices because it's easier. So when the court issues the notification of a hearing, I think based upon like workloads and stuff, I typically look at mine like a month ahead of time instead of doing them as soon as the court schedules it, just because I find that people forget. But it is sort of practice based, and those are usually hearings, so they're not necessarily urgent events. I think that there's more hand holding around like a change of plea or a bail review hearing, and those come up quickly. So there's a lot of verbal communication, like this is happening on this day. This is a date that the offender could be released because it's a substantive hearing where we're considering bail.
So emergent being like pre-adjudicated, like so they're not actually adjudicated is maybe what we're talking about with non-emergent. Emergent and emergency notifications is around possibly potentially pre-adjudication versus an incarcerated projected release date.
Right.
That's why I was just trying to figure out the definitions. If there's like
all of our I think that all of our communications are primarily going to be pre-adjudication, and then we hand off and rely on Vine for post-adjudication releases.
Yeah. No, I understand that. To me, I was just trying to see if there is a universal definition used in this world of survivor work of what is emergent and what's not.
I think that's something this group could look at, right? Is like emergent definitely would be any like custody status change, and that happens at all phases of the spectrum. Law enforcement, as we talked, emergency arrest is a huge one in law enforcement. For state's attorney's office, it's like a bail review hearing where it's like somebody could be released. Those are urgent. I think any release or custody change status, and I'd be interested to hear from Kelsey and Jane on this, but those feel like the imminent threat moments.
Yeah, so I'd love to, like, if there's not that time, building that definition around support.
Mm-hmm.
But I also just want to add that sometimes that is defined by the victim, and there's some victims that want to know every single thing, and so I think again, I get a little, I think it's good to have guidelines around emergent, but what might be emergent for us or not emergent for us might be emergent for someone else. And I think that goes back to that communication piece that we're having with people we're working with.
I think maybe, and how we can utilize the system across the spectrum, the continuum, and identifying, you know what I mean? If Amy, you have a victim who wants to be contacted all the time, that information is then shared along that continuum into post-adjudication, where we can still be responsive in that capacity, which may be what Megan has already established and how that looks. I think that's based on the victim wants, of course, how we communicate that as well and keep that documentation and maintaining that privacy.
And in a timely
having
manner.
direct communication with people, because sometimes people change their mind in every step in the way, like in every system change, like communicating directly. Because sometimes people change their minds or change what they need. Those things can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've said this several times before, but exactly what Amy said, and whatever we're saying is that not only is it we may change our mind for very reasonable changes that may happen, but also the reality that any person cannot necessarily process and retain information when we are in the middle of experiencing a traumatic event. And many twists and turns of this process, there are new traumatic events. And so, how we're feeling and our ability to process options and all of the pieces when it's delivered is going to change. And so having it offered more than once over the course of the continuum is so important. Trauma-informed practices.
Use the first one I did for
Jen, I see your hand raised. Oh, go ahead. I can go after you.
I had a question that relates to this, and I'd asked Meredith about it, but I'm not sure if she had any luck. But pursuant in the directive on page 6, it does reference a VANS notification events and timeline document. And I asked Meredith about that. She was like, I don't think I've ever seen it. She was going to track it down, but if that exists somewhere, I'd be interested to see that. But Kelsey's responding. Okay, you have the answer?
We have someone that cannot speak until public comment time that has a document, I believe, that was made from something that Meredith had, and it was sent to me, and it's pretty great. So.
Oh, that would be helpful. I was just
talking about Anna. Anna here.
Oh,
Just
okay.
waiting to be able to talk to say, hey, I have that.
Okay, great. Because Meredith wasn't, she's like, I'm not sure. So I was like, I'd be really interested. All right, well, we're getting to you. We're getting to you on. Um, so yeah, just obviously a little bit more feedback than you were maybe planning on, Joe, but if those pieces could be brought back because they were an integral part of what, we're trying to accomplish. And I think in some ways these are the easier pieces to address as we work towards the longer term goals of databases and MOUs and such. So, and again, just want to continue to lift up Disability Rights Vermont in terms of a consultant on forms. We use them for all of ours. They're really great. Um, we have, survivors here and advisory council that can look at that, and also just the language translation piece. I've provided to Meredith and others. We had done a language access. I'm pretty certain I provided it to Joyce as well a couple of years ago that identifies some of the groups that are more prevalent in terms of the non-English speaking population. But obviously that's, we have to look at the forms first. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about the menu, but it sounds like you're working toward figuring out what that menu would look like in terms of options and choice.
Yep.
Joe and Cassidy, I really appreciate your work on this. And was wondering, are there changes to Vine as part of this work plan that are being implemented like in the short term?
Yes, I can speak to
Okay.
that. It was an operational decision based on the continuous feedback. And I think there was actually an email shared with Jen and Tim pertaining to that. Meredith had to respond about the release that we're right now holding. Hold on, I'm trying to pull it up. I had it. I was ready.
It was court transfers and the other one was
In
the
between.
transfer in between facilities. And
Yep.
I thought, I was sorry you're here, Cassidy, but I thought Meredith would explain that because I had a lot of questions and concerns, but hearing Joe, I understand a little bit more maybe what was involved, but I think that would be really helpful information to have at the time versus just after the meeting.
Well, this was and to emphasize, this was a DOC operational decision, and understanding that this is a Vine work group. We were happy to share that information. I actually can update. I think Meredith really highlighted that the changes in support was based on the feedback we originally received, that those out to court notifications were misleading and confusing and causing a lot of feedback. So we're holding on it. And actually, when I was looking at it last night, looking both at policy and statute, I found it's actually duplicative of work that's being done already by the SAVAs. And so, which was then again causing more confusion around that. So it doesn't mean that we still do, if an individual is gone to court, they've received their notification from the SAVAs, is if they're released from court, we didn't stop that. That will continue, whether they're released or to probation or released, say a violation of probation was dismissed and probation was closed, that final release notification is still happening. It's just if an individual is going from NECC to court, that's what's being seized and stalled until we can clean up that notification. So that's a really big piece. And again, there was so much communication out there that it was causing more problems than good. The facility to facility transfer notification, that is that they're still in our custody. And when I was looking into, again, I think Meredith explained it really well, is that for now, we do have the jail offender locator. If they're in contact with SAVAs or the probation officer, who is a constant, unless they're actually case transferred to a different county from the original sentence county, that information doesn't change. A CSS may change, but not the actual whoever DOC staff is. We're also working within this. We're looking at our own integrative case management of how do we introduce services to survivors or victims of whom may be now working with an individual closer to their projected release date. So that's something, a policy that's being developed right now, thus halting that facility to facility transfer information, which can also be found on our jail offender locator, which I hope there's education going in and around that.
Mm-hmm. That's very helpful, Cassidy, and I totally understand and respect that, like, as this process moves forward, DOC is has to make changes, and some of those changes, those decisions are happening at DOC and perhaps on a shorter term basis. I would love if any changes on the work plan that are happening in the short term, if perhaps me or other groups, members of this group would just want to know. I think it would be a good opportunity for me to do some education with our membership so that they understand these changes, if they are impacting, those advocates for the survivors that they're serving. So that was just something that, I was thinking about and would appreciate if it's possible. And also, I'm sure they want to know that you are doing great work on this and that you are, being responsive to feedback. And I want to make sure that I share that with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the feedback I received was, and I can talk to Meredith and we can develop something of how we, if those changes are made, to sending to you and Tim and Jennifer, like, hey, these changes have been made. Again, this is an operational decision. We're trying, a Department of Corrections that definitely impacts the same population, but we could and can figure out a system where Meredith reaches out with those changes.
Thank you, Cassidy. I appreciate it. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, but just, a couple bullet points so that we can pass it on, I think would be really helpful for us.
Sure. Thank you.
Jane, you have a question?
Yes. When you said from the offender going from facility to facility, are you talking about the VINE notifications on that?
Yeah, my understanding and from what I'm reading from the feedback I received from Meredith is that there's still a Department of Corrections there's custody, and this kind of we're right now we're doing a lot of movement, and that was also causing and harming the more notifications going out, and it could if they're only in one place for a certain amount of time and moving because of programming, those were causing more. So we're just ceasing those facility to facility. It does not change that you will be notified if it was pertaining to release. That should, there should be DOC staff reaching out pertaining to releases in advance. It does not change whether or not, if they're going in front of the parole board, any of that is not changed. It's just that specific facility to facility transfers.
Can I just tell you my experience with that specific situation with the facility to facility?
Please.
I think with VINE, I think I agree that you should not do the facility to facility notifications anymore, because it has given me panic attacks and put me into PTSD because it says that he's released.
Yeah.
It says he's not in custody anymore because he's moving from one jail to another. So then I'm having a PTSD attack thinking, oh my God, they let him out. Maybe something like a technicality or something happened. And then it's just spiraling as a victim. It's spiraling. So I agree with taking that notification out because that was one of the worst ones that I got. Besides not getting notified at all that he was out, that was probably the number one worst.
Yeah. And that obviously is a significant fail on the system and or process. And that is something that I think as a system we can get better at, so that we don't have things falling through the crack when it is so impactful towards the people. So, but I appreciate that. I know the original feedback in making this determination, it wasn't a siloed decision. It was a operations decision, a discussion based on the feedback, both from testimony and from survivors and from SAVAS. So just want to make that clear. It wasn't a siloed decision. but we can communicate that out to you, Charlie and Jen, and obviously Tim.
Megan, you have your real hand up.
Real hands. Thank you for noticing. I just wanted to make 2 points here. One, I think that to Cassidy's point, and to Jane's point, this is one of the notifications that we hear the most is like, since Vine eliminated, and my understanding is they fully eliminated the like options for people to like, I want to be notified only of release. It used to be like back in the day, if we all remember, you used to be able to select the different notices you wanted to get notified of. And so for, I think, particularly traumatized victims who are still in it and working through it, those notices, like anytime it pops up, like that there's a Vine email, it's triggering. I also just wanted to highlight that I think the notice that Jane received related to that was actually like probably a booking code error, because the notification that goes out should say this person was transferred to NECC or wherever. It should never say that that person was released. It probably was like a human error of like entering the wrong code when somebody was actually being transferred. But those do go out when like somebody's taken into Fed custody or somebody's like taken to a hospital or something. It will just say released. And so that's one of the areas that maybe we want to highlight for Joe. I don't know if there's like a data clarification piece that could be addressed as part of it.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what we're going over. And sometimes those are booking errors, but it's kind of also goes to the over complexity of the way that the system evolved. I think they put automated rules on top of other rules. And so sometimes they would use where it says final released when it was really, they were final released from this location and immediately booked into another location. So we're working on that, as well as, turning off the facility to facility notifications.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And then just one piece that I want to highlight that's not necessarily from a survivor perspective, but could be like some, as Amy pointed out earlier, it really varies between survivor to survivor what people want. Some survivors do want to know, particularly because of the hospital transfers. Like I worked with a woman who very specifically wanted to know when her the person who harmed her was at a local facility, because he would frequently be transferred to a hospital. So when he was at Springfield, she worked at the hospital. And there was an incident where she ended up running into him. And so I know that's like a really nuanced situation, but that from a survivor perspective, sometimes those transfers, and I know they can get the data elsewhere, but maybe there's a way to maybe just clean up that notification, or I don't know if options are coming back, but those would be two solutions.
Well, I have a couple of questions to that, Megan. Now, was that communicated to the facility caseworker of those issues for release for medical furlough? Because we do
I don't think it was a furlough issue. I think it was like an emergent. I don't know how it happened. I was working at DOC at the time, so it was.
Okay. So a couple of years ago, because I think since then, if somebody's issued out on medical furlough, that there's a way and highlighted notification to people who have been harmed. So that's been updated in practice. But the other thing was that you had mentioned is that information. If she had shared it to you, I'm wondering how that, was DOC. Did we have that individual's information? Because I think we're all looking out for the best interest. And that's what I was just trying to gauge. Thank you for sharing your stories. And I do know that individuals who are risk contained are not actually eligible for medical furlough release, medical supervision furlough, which means that they're going to have staff members present, but still something good for the staff members, I think, is another piece to make sure that they're aware that there is a conflict there and to try to eliminate any further trauma to that.
And I think
working at the hospital.
Right. None of that information was known because it was a person, the individual killed her infant. And there had not been a lot of communication that happened while that person was incarcerated. She was registered in Vine. So she was getting notification. He was transferred out of state for a long time and then came back. And when he was at Southern State, I think went for like an emergency surgery or something to that effect. I don't know if it was I wasn't sure if it was a full med furlough, like if we went through that process, or if it was just like he ended up being transferred in an emergent situation and there was a release notification. It had happened previously. So when I encountered her around a victim offender dialogue, she had shared this experience with me. Like, I want, like, this happened. I want to highlight it for you.
Yeah. Thank you. It's something
then
to definitely think about.
Yeah, just a weird circumstance that does come up. And then also though, we have to remember that not only, and I don't know if DOC is going to shift this practice, but Vine is also like access to information for everybody. So there's a ton of people in there that are not, and not that this group has to care about it, but I think that's one of the notifications that people who are maybe like incarcerated individual of family members or something of the like do like to get the notification that like, hey, they're not at Southern State anymore. They're not at the facility where and they rely on that for that information.
Well, we do now and have really built up our constituent services where family members and individuals will have a direct contact to be able to access information. But again, like if they're like there's that difference between being pre-adjudicated and post-adjudicated. Like then we're back to that same kind of like, how do we bridge? Yeah. So, yeah, but I understand and hear your importance.
Thank you, guys.
Well, as I suspected, we're not going to get through the agenda, but we do need to make space for public comment, and we certainly have a lot to bring forward to our next meeting. But do want to see if there are members of the public who haven't spoken who want to comment, or just raise your hand or just jump in, or if not.
Hello, everyone. This has been really insightful to listen in on. It's really exciting to hear everyone coming together around this. And I just am really excited to hear all about like wanting to do more training and want to encourage really like realistic long-term plans for training staff that goes beyond just the first cycle because of turnover and all of those different things to really create scheduling around that. I did send to Jenna, I had created from that thing that Meredith did last year, a whole continuum of the justice continuum. So I sent that to Jenna, and that also has all the intersection points where Vine can be intersected into that. So I figured she doesn't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel when it's already been done. So I sent that over to her, and I really appreciated Amy's comments throughout the day of focusing on the individual needs and the privacy of victims, and that our needs change, as Kelsey and Jane both reflected, I think is so important. And I know that's something that I firmly believe in as well. So I'm excited to keep listening into what you all are doing. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss next week's meeting or 2 weeks, but I'll be here for the other ones.
And do you have that specific timeline then, Hannah, as far as that document that's referenced in the directive? I think, was it Kelsey that said you might have that, the notification events and timelines document?
I'm not sure exactly. I'd need to see that document to make sure. So I think that like the chart I sent over kind of fits that bill, but it doesn't necessarily. So I need to relook at that.
It's referenced on page 6 of the directive. So if you want to just take a look at it, because I'm just curious to see what, if anything, is actually it's referenced, if what exists.
I'm familiar with that document, and I know that we initially sent it out with the directive. So I suspect that it exists in some share file that that DOC staff have access to. So it's a real thing, and it's out there.
It's a real thing.
I know it can be found.
Can I ask, can someone send out the directive, or
I did.
Where you did send it? Because I was trying to find it and I couldn't find it.
No, it's right in the email I sent yesterday.
Oh, it's in this one. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I can resend it, but it was in the collection of.
Kelsey, I did the same thing.
Don't worry about it, Jen. Don't worry, but don't send it again.
Where is it referenced, Jen? I don't know why I'm having a hard time remembering what this
page. It's page 6. It's sub C, number 5.
Am I on the wrong page?
Just something for the next meeting, because we have to stay true to the official rules that govern us. So. Any other comments from the public or anybody else have any last things they want to add? All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. This has been a really productive meeting. I hope for everybody as much as for myself. And looks like we've got some charts to look at, some other forms to, get caught up with, and really appreciate Joe being here to also bring back to the group that's working on some of these more specific issues. Again, I like this. I like to see things accomplished that are easier. So I'm counting on you, Joe, to help us out with that because databases and all that stuff are going to be uh, definitely part of the long-term goal. But definitely, especially Joe, in your conversations, be thinking about, we're here to get resources into the system. So in terms of what, we're looking at, we'll have to do some of this conversation via email, I do think too, to really get it done in time for the deadline of November 15th. But part of looking at the charts that seem to exist is really to start thinking about the resources. We didn't get to the law enforcement forms and thinking about those and how we can be doing a different approach to that as well. So we can at least start to populate this data in a better way throughout. So I just want to get people thinking and yeah, it's 10:50. Oh, I'm sorry, Cassidy.
No, I think I was just wondering if adding to that to the next agenda is looking at if we're starting from the beginning of law enforcement Sabas and also into that immediate sentencing about the restitution and reimbursement. Like, I don't think DOC is as versed. Just wondering, like, on that continuum of information and moving and notifications and information provided to victims of records, through that continuum and how to best support once they're maxed. Someone's completed their sentence but hasn't completely, where do they go for services after someone has actually completed their sentence in incarceration too? Will we be focusing that on too when it's no longer DOC's?
Yes, and you had also raised the issue, Cassidy, around the probation piece and how,
Yeah.
what are we doing there? So I'm going to have to rewatch this tape 50 times to
Oh
really
no.
try and distill it all because there are so many different points. So I'll be probably getting something out to you on the earlier side to try and flesh out some of these pieces. We do have some carry forward pieces. I know that again, Charlie had volunteered to work with her membership as well. I think more time was appreciated for her to do that. So I don't think that she's, not relishing the extra time to do that. So there's some things to carry forward, but there's a lot to think about. And, want to hear from you all after this about specific pieces. But you raised a couple of really important points as well, Cassidy, that I think this is an overwhelming task for us. It really is. All right, so we meet 2 weeks from tomorrow, and really thank you again to Haley and to Jenna for keeping the boat afloat, and we'll just carry forward. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.